pleasure for me to be back at what I used to know as AHIC. I probably saw some of you in Ras Al Khaimah a few years back, but here I am again. I'm delighted to be here. Without further ado, let's get His Excellency up onto the stage. Minister, if you would join me, we are delighted that you're able to join us. We thank you for making time, sir. Great to see you. Do take a seat. Minister, we do appreciate you're pressed for time. That flight to Paris awaits. But before you rush to the airport, there are a few things I really do want to ask you. Let's start with a very basic question. The expansion of the tourism hospitality sector in UAE is extraordinary. We all see the hotels, the theme parks, the Formula One, all of the attractions that you've brought to UAE. How much of this is coherently planned? Is there really a strategy behind all of this? And this is for you, so there you go. I think it's on.
It has been planned for the last 4 decades. I think that the most important aspect of the UAE's plan for tourism wasn't planned overnight. And I think this is something which is very vital and important. It's always been an organic growth. It's always been a slow growth for hospitality. We've seen 4 decades of expansions. We've seen 4 decades of hotel buildings. We've seen 4 decades of research and really looking at these things that really challenges us. And I think the most important was COVID-19 challenge. At the time when hotels and airports was on lockdown and closed down, we looked at the numbers and we did a bit of a revision and saw that 70% or 60% of our tourists are from international tourists. 30 to 40% of tourism was from the UAE or from inner cities tourism. And when we looked globally, we saw that Europe, for instance, has a 50-50 or 60-40 towards more of inner tourism than actual international tourism. And this is what we started to think about to change. How can we really activate local tourism in a way that actually becomes a big part of the industry? Today we have the coolest winter campaign that happens in the winter. You should be here in January and February. We have the coolest, more guaranteed sunshine winter in the world. And I think that's something where we attract, and that's designated for those who are for local tourists, and the tourism where we look at adventure, more sustainable tourism, more attractions as well towards areas that we, as locals, we never heard about in the UAE.
Now, am I right in thinking tourism, hospitality, this entire sector represents something like up to 15% of GDP? Is that roughly correct?
Well, it's 15 plus or minus on that, but as well another one, 14 to 15% is the aviation industry.
Right.
So they come hand in hand. They're about 30% of our GDP. And where we have oil and gas is 30%. So that's 60% of the whole economy of the UAE is tourism, aviation, and oil and gas.
I guess what I'm leading to is a question about the politics of all of this. I mean, you're an interesting figure because you're Minister of Economy, but part of your portfolio is very much the tourism sector. So you tell me, do you think that tourism truly gets a seat at the table when you guys in the government are having your key sort of planning and strategic policy-making meetings? Is tourism at the table? Because that's a theme that we're developing in this conference, the degree to which governments around the world are now listening to and integrating the tourism sector into policy-making.
Yes, of course. It's we back in May, I think June this year, we launched the UAE tourism strategy, 2031. This is in the cabinet where we approved it, and we did it a bottom-up approach, working with all the local departments of tourism in the UAE to build up a tourism strategy that focuses on attracting 450 billion dirhams worth of investments, to raise the GDP of tourism to about 17% of GDP, to focus on sustainable tourism, to really build a brand identity for the UAE's tourism as well, part of our strategy. It's all, we ran it through the government, we pushed it forward, and it is part of the table when it comes to data and part of our economy as well, because we don't look at the current investment that comes in from hotels or building infrastructure. What really happens is the F&B industry really picks up. The extreme sports, for instance, picks up. Culture tourism comes up. And there's a lot of that kind of aspects comes with it. And this by itself, the UAE has built an infrastructure to really accommodate all these types of tourism across and over the years. And when I'm saying that, I'm saying because it has a huge built-up of tourism that happened in the last 4 decades or 5 decades. That's really where the UAE stands today at this percentage of GDP.
You just mentioned to me in one of your previous answers sustainability as a key sort of strategic value in the way you're developing tourism. Let us be honest, there are people who are going to look at UAE and at your huge investment in visitor attractions. They're going to think there's something problematic here. When you have to air condition the golf buggies on your golf courses, when you build indoor ski slopes in 40-degree heat, when you are rolling out more and more investment in a country where the climate is extreme, this doesn't smack of sustainability. How can you convince the world that you can continue to expand and tick those sustainability boxes, particularly in the light of the fact you're hosting the next COP in just a month's time?
Exactly, that's what we're doing, is we're handling the bull by the horn. I think COP28 and handling the climate challenge is something which is important to the UAE. Now, data for us shown in the tourism industry, 9 out of 10 tourists, when they search for hotels in the industry, they look for sustainable and eco-tourism hotels that actually provide the necessary for that aspects. With that said, I think today we have a fully equipped hotel industry that really focuses on the eco-tourism and more sustainable tourism. There's a huge conservatory areas. We have a lot of reservations of mainland that has been announced. A lot of areas has been part of the protected lands for animals and tourism to come together as wildlife. And this is something which is, for us, is big. In Sharjah, for instance, last year, there was the opening of the biggest safari outside Africa that really hosts a lot of the animals' welfare and bringing the kind of education to the animals and to the ecotourism as well, part of it. We have Al Marmoom conservation that's happening in Dubai. That's where you can actually, enjoy a night in the desert with some grilling with the gazelles and with the wildlife as well.
Well, it all sounds great, but can you do all of that and still meet what has become a global demand for a net zero by 2050?
Yes.
You can?
Yes, and I think that's what does net zero mean? If we actually understand the net zero aspects, then we understand the plan that we have today for tourism. And part of our plan, the strategy for tourism, is to reach the net zero by 2050. And I think it's an important aspect. Now, all the industry here are really focusing on sustainable tourism, on the ecotourism aspects. They have focused on building their infrastructure to really accommodate that. And the leadership here in the UAE is really focused on really building this kind of infrastructure to last.
Tell me something about your role as a minister. Do you ever look at projects that are brought to you from outside investors and say, no way, that is simply not fitting with our strategic vision, we're knocking it back? In other words, to what extent are you now indulging in quality control?
Well, as a minister, we don't do projects, we do policies. And I think it's at a point where the local governments, departments, they do the projects and they invest into the projects that they look at. And the private sector here in the room, they do all the investments based on the strategies we have. So as a minister, we look at policies. We have to encourage sustainable, for instance, tourism is one of our policies. We encourage other types of policies, for instance, to really create the ecosystem for it to organically grow. So that's where our business lies.
Do you think that there could come a point of saturation in UAE where such is the scale of development, the expansion of the hotel sector, hospitality, and everything that goes with it, that you have reached a saturation point?
I think that's for the local governments to decide on the saturation aspect. But for the UAE, I think we'll never have enough of tourism and enjoying, especially when we have moved our weekdays to 4.5 working days. And we kept the 2.5 days for the weekends. Now, let's mention that because it's really added up a lot in the tourism industry. We've seen retail, we've seen hospitality really grow huge by having 2.5 days of weekends compared to the last one. It used to be 2 days or a day and a half in the past. And I think that was a bit for the government to really take that kind of policies we decide on, not the projects. These are policies to decide where we actually designed that increasing the days of weekends can actually really propel the tourism and the local tourism as well in the UAE.
From a strategic point of view, thinking ahead 10, 20 years, one thing that intrigues me about hospitality, tourism, and development in this part of the world is the prospect of increased competition, a real challenge coming from Saudi Arabia, whose determination to expand their tourism sector is seen in, huge investment and promotion and advertising right around the world. Do you regard Saudi Arabia now as a competitor in a strategic sense?
I think what's for Saudi Arabia is good for the GCC. If the tide comes up, it pulls up all the boats up. And I think that's something for us is important. And we're going to see now very soon something which is around the kind of a GCC visa where we can allow as well the movement and mobility for us. So we've seen in Saudi the movement of people who reside in the UAE can enter the kingdom and vice versa. I think that's something where we're going to see it as well with the Kingdom of Bahrain. We're going to see it with Oman. So more of actually having the local tourism focus not just on one country of itself, but how can the local tourism as well focus on the GCC level? I think that's something which is being on the table. It's being complementing all the GCC strategies on tourism. And I think that's where we're going to lead the future of GCC tourism as well. We have a strategy for 2030 on the GCC level to complement our economy, and specifically on the tourism aspect to really grow together.
Yeah, that's a very positive and indeed tactful and diplomatic answer. But is there also a sense of new competition? I mean, after all, the tourism market is huge and it's still growing, but nonetheless, people make choices. If Saudi Arabia becomes a much more attractive proposition, there may be potential visitors you are losing to Saudi.
Well, I think when we take the definition of competition, it's important to have competition in your economy. Not just on the level of, internationally, but from a level from between companies to companies. And I think competition seen in the history that actually it grows and makes people to innovate and create more innovation as well. And I think that's something which is very healthy and important to have in the region. And I think this is something which we, welcome, and it's something which is really good. And I think competition for me makes my GDP grow the 7% I need to grow. I need to grow 7% by 2030 to reach double my economy, to reach 3 trillion dirhams by then. Now, to do 7% without competition, no way I'll reach that. So I need competition, and I thank for everybody who's competing, because competition really, even within the Emirates, between Emirates and Emirates, or within the Emirates itself, we see competition between private sector to other private sector trying to compete on a piece of land or compete in building a new hotel. That's something which is very important for any economy to really push this drive of 7% growth.
Final question, because we're both very aware of the time. You've talked about the strategic vision, the 10-year plan. You envision growth of 7% a year. Physically, it's changing the UAE. We see it all around us with the massive expansion, the construction. How is it changing the culture of this place, do you think?
I think the culture is actually growing with the expansions of the UAE's economy. We've seen there is preservation to the culture. We haven't seen a huge effect or impact. And I think that's something which the leadership really take this at heart, at preserving it. And I think this is something which we really focus on. We have a Minister of Culture that has a big role on his shoulders to really preserve the culture and to really move as well forward with building the culture of the UAE. Yes, we can have a lot of economy, we can have a lot of growth, we can have a lot of boost and investments coming in, but culture is a cream on the top of all of that. And I think that UAE has a very strong culture, preserving it and keeping it as well at the forefront of this growth.
I can't tell you what a professional you are, because we have a rundown clock here and it's just hitting 0 right now. I think this is a man who does need to get to the airport. I joked with him that he ought to have brought his suitcase on stage because he literally has to rush to Paris straight from here. Your Excellency, we really appreciate your time before your journey. We wish you a safe journey and we thank you so much for joining us here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's great to see you. Thank you. Thank you. Your Excellency, please do feel free to leave now. We know you have to run. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we do thank His Excellency very much indeed for joining us in the middle of what clearly is a very busy schedule. So we've heard about the strategic vision, the ambition here in the United Arab Emirates. We saw a Minister of Economy who also has tourism very much in his portfolio, and his outlining of the degree to which the government here is absolutely determined to put tourism front and center in policy making and the rollout of their economic plan. So that's very interesting, but let's consider now how that works in other countries and whether internationally tourism really does have a powerful voice at the governing table. So to discuss all of that, let me invite two terrific guests onto the stage to join me right now. So please join me now, Ghada Shalaby. Her Excellency Ghada Shalaby is Vice Minister of Tourism and Antiquities in Egypt. So give her a very warm welcome. Your Excellency, welcome. Let me invite you to take a seat. Choose whichever one looks more comfortable. It's great to see you. And alongside Her Excellency, please welcome Haitham Mattar, who is a special advisor to the UNWTO. He's also managing director for the MEA and Southwest Asia of IHG Hotels and Resorts. And Haitham, a very warm welcome to you. Now, Ghada, you have a handheld, great.
Yeah.
You have both. You're going for 2 mics. Yeah, I think your fitted mic will be fine, Haitham, so don't worry about that. Minister, let me start with you. I'm sure you were listening carefully to the Minister of Economy here in UAE talk about the 10-year plan, talk about the degree to which tourism is absolutely prioritized as part of UAE's long-term economic vision. Is it the same in Egypt?
Well, yeah, and more likely is, but also Egypt with its history in travel and tourism for long years.
Millennia. We've always wanted to visit Egypt to see the amazing history, the antiquities, of course.
Yeah, and the upcoming gem as well, the Grand Egyptian Museum that is soon to be open probably by next year. So yeah, Egypt is, tourism is long years back. And the policies and procedures that we've got is like decades back as well. What we've done is we've reformed our position as a Ministry of Tourism, being the regulator, being the policymaker and the licensor for the hotels and other establishments working in tourism. We supervise over than 8,000 establishments and over than 300,000 employees working in this industry. So in basic words, it's a robust economy in Egypt. It is tackling all families and the economy as well.
We were chatting a little bit earlier, and I used to live in Egypt. And when I lived in Egypt, the state wasn't just a regulator of the tourism industry, it was a key player and participant within the industry, owning hotels, owning travel companies, you know, absolutely the dominant force across that sector. Is that fundamentally changed? Is the state still a participant? And if so, doesn't that make it very complicated when it comes to deciding what your true interests are in this sector?
No, actually, we've drawn the line between the regulator from the ministry side and also from the private sector side. In private sector, it's managed by the federation, the Travel and Tourism Federation, and 5 chambers, looking at the best interest of the industry and also drawing their laws and procedures that is enabling them to do their business best. From the policy-making point of view also, we are helping them. We've drafted 2 laws in the past couple of years. The previous ones were decades. And now these laws enables the private sector to be more transparent, to be more empowered, to have more think tanks in helping the industry come up with new ideas, fresh ideas, and also enable the private sector to do their part and be more profitable. Okay.
Well, Haitham, give us an overview now. You have long experience in this industry from different sides. I mean, you're at IHG now, but you're an advisor to the UNWTO. And you also, I think in the past, have advised the Saudi government, and we had a discussion about that just a few minutes ago. When you look internationally, do you think tourism is being prioritized in the right way by governments around the world? And is there real evidence of strategic, of joined-up, coherent thinking, which puts tourism in the middle of debates about the future of infrastructure development, all of the things, transportation, the things that matter to tourism? Is it joined up or not?
The short answer is no to that. And I tell you, this part of the world, this region, has had a very robust tourism strategy.
I'll tell you what, Haitham, just put your mic just a little
that
bit.
Way.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
So the short answer is no. The longer answer is this region has had a very robust and clear vision when it came to tourism and developing tourism. So we're looking at Saudi Arabia, but also the UAE started with their Vision 2030, and also the Egyptian government had gone out also with their tourism strategy. You do not hear much about the rest of the world's tourism strategy. So the economies are different. Obviously, this part of the world was more dependent on oil. Now we're looking at diversifying economies, and hence the focus on tourism. If you think about the United Kingdom, for example, tourism represents about 9% pre-pandemic, right? After pandemic, they're now nudging about 4.5% to 5%, but you not necessarily hear about the UK's Visit Britain sort of tourism strategy and the focus on that, or building the tourism infrastructure, albeit there's an abundance of activities and events and historical sites to visit around the UK, whereby this part of the world is probably establishing its tourism footprint. As you mentioned earlier, Egypt's tourism dates back to thousands of years ago, not hundreds even. Egypt did lead the way in tourism when tourism was kicked off, and Egypt was reaching about 11 to 12 million tourists a year. His Excellency Mr. Ahmed Isa announced that he was aiming to reach over 20 million tourists, which is absolutely fantastic. UNWTO announced in 2019 1.5 billion people crossed borders. So there's a lot of tourists out there for everybody to benefit from. Now, are they joined up? You mentioned earlier when you talked to His Excellency, the Minister of Economy here, this is a very unique setup where you got economy looking at tourism because they come hand in hand. Yeah. Right. And he did. You mentioned about competition. I think there's enough tourists out there for everyone. It's what does each destination offer to tourists as a differentiator, and sometimes, not always, is the price point, which is a distraction to some of the destinations where we as hoteliers or hospitality industry start to look, how do we package lower offers or lower rates? And sometimes that's not what a tourist is looking for. So when we look at how countries are joined up, we look at this part of the world, and you see Emirates joining with Saudi Tourism Authority. You see the Ministry of Tourism joining up with the UAE Ministry of Tourism or Economy, putting together packages for continued stopover programs for people to visit the UAE and continue on to Riyadh or the rest of Saudi.
Right. Inevitably, at conferences like this, you end up spending a lot of time using words like sustainability and environmental responsibility. Everybody comes up on a stage like this and says, oh, we're absolutely committed, it's part of our core values, we build it into all of our expansion plans. I'll start with you, Haitham. Do you think that's really true? And do you think that the customer now is actually, you talk about the decision-making of the customer and it's not always about the price point, is it increasingly going to be about an assessment of sustainability, of environmental values? And do you think this region in particular is going to have an advantage or a disadvantage if that is the case?
Great question. Look, Intercontinental did a study recently, and 80% of the respondents said that they would choose a hotel company that practices sustainable or puts sustainable practices into action. And they're willing to pay 30% more for these hotels. So consumers are making a choice, right? And if you look at Booking.com or Google, they've highlighted hotel companies or hotels that have clear sustainable actions in their properties. Now, it's not an easy fix, if you like. There comes along a high cost to transform hotels to sustainable hotels, if you like. Owners and investors see this as a cost rather than an investment because it's a long-term gain. What's really expensive here, Stephen, is converting existing hotels to become sustainable. They're built years ago, and to bring those into a sustainable or decarbonize is probably the best term. Decarbonize these hotels is quite expensive. Owners see this as a cost rather than an investment. Now, building new hotels to be decarbonized from the outset requires a regulator. You mentioned earlier to His Excellency the Minister of Economy. You are the regulator. How do you regulate? So how do you regulate sustainable decarbonized hotels, and what is that building code? How do you define a decarbonized hotels? What is the criteria? So there's a lot of work that is there.
You need a lot of auditing, and maybe independent outside auditing, which, Ghada, let me bring it to Egypt and to you. You say we're opening up our tourism market, now it's privatized, we're an open market. But you, in the government, presumably need to be auditing, you need to be regulating to make sure that the people who come in are doing it in a sustainable, environmentally responsible way. So how does it work?
Well, let me first start by saying during the past few years, we've realized that for Egypt, it's not a matter of the demand. It's the matter of the offering. And on that basis, we started to shift our policy towards fixing the offering, fixing the products that we have, and from the sustainability point of view, as Haitham has mentioned, it is related to the hotels that is built. It's been built for the past few years, how you can change these, and there is a cost for that. Who's going to pay for the cost? We've worked with international bodies, and especially after the successful COP27 last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, hosting over than 40,000 in this leisure destination and transforming more than 75% of the hotels, of the existing hotels, to become green and sustainable. So working with the owners, working with these companies, persuading them that there is a need and there is a demand in this offering part, and there are customers who are keen and looking at this product. And at the end of the day, it's not a matter of a fancy thing. It's going to save them as well in the costs. So we've helped them in implementing few projects like solar panel plants and changing their policies, changing their even simple things in their light bulbs. So you're changing historical hotels that has been built for the past 20 years and trying to modernize these properties. And they've done it really well. They swallowed and digested the directions of the country, the directions of the global economy, and they're working with us really well on that.
So I guess this is a model of sort of public-private partnership.
It is.
Which actually seems very important going forward to get this really working. I mean, right around the world, not just obviously in Egypt, but right around the world.
Well, the message that Egypt announced last year from COP27. Who's going to pay the cost? These are, long years of building in the wrong way, and now you're trying to reach zero carbon in 2050.
Are there going to be some hotels, some properties that simply just are closed down? That you have to close down, break, and rebuild?
There are a few properties that were outdated and it required being leveraged due to the modernization, and it's the competition. This is the key driver for remodeling and rebranding the properties.
Haitham, I'm going to ask you, in a sense, to be a critic now of the minister. I mean, you work for IHG, you're looking at the Middle East arena. Obviously, a lot of attention is drawn to the Gulf and the money that there is here and the vast expansion. But Egypt is also expanding. There's new projects, I know, on the Mediterranean coast. There's new cities which come with their hotel complexes and whatever. Do you think a country like Egypt is showing that it has a strategic and a responsible vision for the expansion of the tourism sector?
I would say, look, since a very long time, yes, Egypt has now started to demonstrate its full potential of tourism infrastructure, infrastructure for...
But it's a question of whether it's being done right. I mean, we know it's being done, and we know the expansion is there, but is it being done in the right way?
Well, there's a lot of areas for improvement still. So, for example, when it comes to licensing in Egypt, it still is a long and a lengthy process. So that is an area where the Ministry of Tourism is working closer with the private sector to look at these nuisances and find solutions to accelerate the licensing, but also improve the ease of business in Egypt. Right now, obviously, with the current inflation ratios and the economic recession, as well as the difficulty of taking money out of Egypt, it's suppressing the interest of investors to continue to invest. I'm talking about foreign investors into Egypt. And Egypt is going to require more foreign investors to come in. I recently signed a deal with Al-Rajhi from Saudi Arabia in Egypt for 3 hotels. So there is interest. We're not saying there isn't. And I think there's just so much headroom for us to improve that ease of doing business, focus on the economy, bring the recession out of Egypt, and put a stronghold on that currency fluctuation is what's going to help Egypt going forward.
In a conversation like this, we tend to, focus on expanding tourism numbers, on what the customer wants, and then how the public and the private partnership can best deliver for the customer. But I am also keen to think about communities and workers, the labor force in the tourism sector. So when we're having this big debate about policy making and strategic vision, do you think the impact on communities and on labor forces, particularly in countries like yours, is properly considered as part of the strategic vision?
So we are a nation of 100 million individuals.
And let us be honest, many of them poor, many of them disadvantaged.
Sure, but as I mentioned, about 300,000 working in the tourism sector, indirect labor. Over than 2 million with indirect businesses, and over than 10 million dependent on the economy of this industry. So there is a genuine belief that tourism is vital for the best of the families. In recent developments in new cities like in the North Coast, or if I mention St. Catherine with the Tajalli Al-Azam project is taking part, this project is not done without involving the local community, because it's built with the local community and it's built for them as well, and looking at their future and the best future for them. So we are not building these new cities away from them. And there is the initiative, the presidential initiative is called Haya Karima. This is away from tourism, but it's also helping the locals to have a better life and what they really deserve, as a Haya Karima says, living with dignity. These are mainly some of the projects that the government is working on to improve the well-being of the individuals, and also it lies into the benefit of tourism. Tourism is an industry that refines the individuals. It teaches how you can deal with respect and dignity and refined approach to
well,
travelers.
that's what we hope it is. It isn't always like that. And I'm going to leave the last word then, if I may, to Haitham. Haitham, again, thinking about your role advising the UNWTO and others, are you still concerned about the degree to which the industry has got the balance right, balancing the needs of the operators, the businessmen, with local communities and many of the poorer people who work in the sector?
Let me just start back with Egypt. As Egypt led the way in tourism, Egypt is advantaged in a way because at least every home in Egypt has 1 or 2 people working in tourism directly or indirectly. So that's an advantage. In other parts of the Middle East, take the GCC for example, we have to import employees.
Right.
But the advantage is you have a great diversity of people, of nationalities, who come in with a diverse set of expertise and skills that contributes to the experience of a tourist or a customer. Now, we're all working towards nationalization, and the reason we are because we still truly believe that the locals are the best ambassadors of a destination, and they're the best at portraying the story to a tourist who comes into the destination. Now, there's a lot of work from various government entities in ensuring that human rights are in place. We've seen a great amount of work that's been done in Qatar. UAE has led the way in that many years ago already. Employees in this part of the world who are imported have rights, but they also have a huge amount of benefits. And they come from disadvantaged backgrounds where they are at home, so they come here. Let's take Dubai as an example. We're importing employees who come from very less fortunate backgrounds, disadvantaged homes, and they come here to a beautiful lifestyle, great advantages. And now we as hotels, for example, are building great employee accommodation that fits into the UAE government's code and criteria and governance, right, ensuring that we have great facilities for them, entertainment, sports activities at their accommodation, but also transportation to take them to either the shopping malls when they're off duty or back to the hotel and back to their accommodation. So it's a tricky game, Stephen. It's not easy to please the 80, 90 nationalities that some of our hotels host and make everybody happy. But when you look at how much effort is being put from hotels to accommodate this, you'll realize that there is really a great amount of effort.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've enjoyed this conversation because it's brought home the different, when we're talking about policy making and tourism being put front and center, given a priority, there are so many different ways in which this matters to national and international economies, and you've both put it into a great context, great perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time, but please give a very warm thank you to Ghada Shalaby and Haitham Mattar. Thank you both very much.